हेलो फ्रेंड्स, वेलकम वंस अगेन टू अ ब्रांड न्यू सेशन ऑफ मशीन लर्निंग। सो आज का हमारा टॉपिक है के मीन्स। If I am having n number of datas and I want to divide the n number of datas into k number of groups, so dividing n number of data into k number of groups, k can be 2, 3, 4, 5, any number, is called as your k-means clustering algorithm. So actually how the data works. So here you can see that I am having some n number of persons. Here n is equals to 8, and I am dividing the 8 number of persons into 3 cluster. So here k is equals to your 3, and the criteria in which I am dividing the person are height and width. So here first cluster is my very slim and tall person, second cluster is my tall as well as fatty person, and third cluster, my red one, is very much less height and fatty person. So according to these three criterias, height and width, those criterias, I am dividing the persons into three cluster. Here my n is equal to 8 and my k is equal to 3, and n number of data are grouped into three clusters. So here you can see that I'm having some unlabeled data, and after applying the K-means algorithm, these data are labeled as divided into three clusters such as green, blue and red. So here you can see that I'm having some organized data, that is blue, green and red data are mixed up, and after applying the algorithm, my cluster are separated into three clusters as red, blue and green. So in the next I will see that how actually the algorithm works, how the data works mathematically. So here you can see that I am having, here there are two clusters. Okay, you can see there are two clusters and the centroid points of the cluster. Okay, so I'm considering two cluster and the centroid points, the middle point of the two cluster, I'm considering here as my 10 and 40. So let's see the data points what I am considering. 2, 5, 30 and 35 are my data points, and the two clusters centroid points are 10 and 40, and the k-means formula, or you can say this formula as your Euclidean distance formula, as my square root of x minus y whole square plus x minus y whole square. This is the formula, k-means formula or Euclidean distance formula, which we use to apply to evaluate the distance of k-means. So here x is my data point, y is my centroid point of each clusters. Okay, so now I'm considering data points. Let's consider first 2 and 5, and let's see that if I'm considering first two data points and seeing both the clusters, that 10, 2 and 5 are quite near to my centered point. If I also subtract 10 minus 2, it will give me 8, and 10 minus 5 will give me 5. But the first two data points 2 and 5, if I see the second cluster 40, it is quite far away from the centroid point. You can see that 40 minus 2 will give you 38, is very larger value in comparison to your first cluster, which gives me 8, and 40 minus 5 will give me 35, which is also quite larger value in comparison to my first cluster, which gives me 5. Quite similar. Okay, the data points which are quite similar to the centroid points, the data points will go into that cluster. So 2 and 5 will go to the first cluster, and 30 and 35 will go to my second cluster. Let's see next how these things are done really in mathematics, how we used to solve the problems. So here I am having data sets. Okay, my data sets are 2, 5, 8, 5, 7, 5, 6, 4 and 4, 9, and my centroids are A1, B1 and C1, having centroid points as 2, 10, 6, 6.2, 1.5, 3.5. Okay, So let's consider the first data points, that is 2 and 5. Okay, so here I am having the 3 centroid cluster. I am doing the diagram of the previous table, centroid A1, B1 and C1 as 3 cluster, and I am giving the centroid point. Okay, so now I will consider the first data points, that is I am having such 5 number of data points, 2 5 8 5 7 5 6 4 and 4 9, but here for evaluation I will just consider my first data points. Okay, and I will apply the Euclidean distance formula. So you can see that 2 5, my first data point, is subtracted from my first cluster, that is 2 10 centroid point, which gives me 2 minus 2 is 0, 5 minus 10 is minus 5, so it gives me minus 5. Now I have to do the square and I have to apply the whole square root. So minus 5 square is 25 and square it gives me 5. And similarly I will apply the formula for my first data points and for my second cluster centroid point, which gives me by subtracting the data point from the second cluster, it gives me minus 2.5, and after applying the whole square and square root, it gives me 25. Similarly, the first data point for third cluster gives me minus 1 and the square root value gives me 1. So now you are getting 3 Euclidean distance value for the first data points, that is 2 and 5. I am getting 5, 25 and 1. So already mentioned and told in my previous that the value of the Euclidean distance which is less, the data point will go into that cluster. So clearly you can see among 5, 25 and 1, the less value is for third cluster, that is 1. The Euclidean distance is less for 1, so the first data point 2 5 1 will go to your third cluster, as the Euclidean distance is very much lesser, that is your 1 in comparison to 5 and 25. So now the same thing which I have already mentioned you, already explained you, 5, 25 and 1, smallest distance is 1 among 3 cluster. So first data point will go to the centroid, third centroid. Okay, third cluster with centroid point 1.5 and 3.5. In the same way we have to calculate for other data points. Now you can see I am showing you some real iteration with the programming in a system. I have done a programming and I'm showing you the real iteration. This is the iteration number 1, in which you can see that the data points, how the data points are trying to make cluster, how the similar, okay, the similar types, or else you can see the which is the lesser distance to the centroid point, the data points which are quite less, the distance from the centroid point, are trying to perform a cluster. So K means we have to consider the centroid point and we have to calculate we have to put the Euclidean distance formula and consider that the value is less, okay, in which we will give the most less value among the 3 clusters. The data point will go into that cluster. Here according to that, the data points will try to the less distance value of the Euclidean distance, the data point will go into that cluster. So you can see how the data points are trying to organize. Here also in the next image you can see that how beautifully the data points are trying to arrange themselves. Okay, just remember one thing, that your centroid point and the Euclidean distance in which the value comes less, the data points will go into that cluster. Okay, so I hope you got the K-means, the concept of K-means, you have got the clear understanding of how the K-means clustering actually work upon the data points. So if you like the video, please like,